Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. If you're new here, consider subscribing. It really helps keep these stories coming. And while you're here, let me know in the comments where you're listening from. Now sit back, relax, and let's get into the story. I was on the service platform under Chicago Union Station when the first emergency message hit the radio. The afternoon shift had been long. 2 downed compressors in the coach yard. A brake test that would not hold on a stubborn coach because the air hose gasket kept leaking, a small oil spill in the pit that needed the absorbent granules swept and bagged. The dispatcher's voice came through thin and clipped, telling all crews to prep for accelerated evacuation. The last train of the evening, a southbound consist bound for St. Louis, had been upgraded from optional to final safe route out. Departure time was 8 o'clock in the evening. It was day 3 since the first alerts, the day when everything started to break at once. I am Ethan Carver, locomotive engineer with Amtrak, 34 years old. Before the railroad, I spent a few years maintaining diesel engines in the army, which is not something I have led with in conversation since I got this job. On most days, that background just means I am fussy about checklists. On this day, it meant I could be useful when red lights across multiple consoles all lit up at the same time. I climbed the steel steps to the platform and felt the station's breath change. Even with the roof above and the grey daylight blocked, you can feel when a big building is full of more people than it was built to hold. The air gets warm and damp in the way that makes the back of your neck feel slick. Voices pack into a roar. Somewhere above me in the Great Hall, under the high barrel ceiling and the massive columns, families clustered with their luggage. The lines at the medical tents snaked around cart kiosks and out toward the Canal Street entrance, and a row of National Guard soldiers had formed a quiet wall with their palms up in a steady, keep moving rhythm. I could not see them yet, but I could hear the echo of public address chimes rolling off the stone. Our consist was a straightforward set. A diesel-electric road engine on the point, 5 coaches, a cafe car that had been stripped down to hand out bottled water and pre-packaged snacks, then a second diesel coupled on the tail to make turns easier at the far end. The locomotive on the head end was a model I knew intimately, the kind built to take a beating. A long hood with a prime mover, which is a large diesel engine that spins a generator to make electricity. The electricity feeds traction motors on the axles. There is no direct mechanical drive to the wheels, which surprises people when they learn it. Inside the cab, the control stand had the usual: brake handles, throttle, reverser key, and the panel for head-end power. Head-end power is the electricity the locomotive sends to the train cars so their lights, heating, ventilation, and air conditioning work. You can think of the locomotive as a rolling power plant that also pushes. I walked the length of the platform to the head end, checked the coupler height to make sure we were level, and stepped up into the cab. I ran the start of day checks as if it were not evening, because my hands only know one direction through a list. Battery voltage steady, fuel level decent, we had topped up during lunch, oil pressure good, main reservoir pressure bled off from earlier, but it would rise. I set the independent brake, which is the brake for the locomotive only, and made sure the automatic brake, which controls the entire train's air system, was in handle-off. The radio crackled with a dispatcher calling for track assignments. The emergency medical tent radioed a request for more tape and gloves. Another voice said the screening line at the concourse had stalled because someone fainted. That was how day 3 sounded. A patchwork of small failures that warned you something larger was about to happen. By 7:10 in the evening, the station swallowed any earlier feeling of order. You can tell when a room is almost at the point where people will start to push, the way murmurs go from low to sharp, the way every little argument about who was before whom in line turns heads, and how even the calm people start asking for exact times. The National Guard had set up portable stanchions to make 2 lanes for the last train. Behind those lanes, more passengers gathered in clusters, clutching paper tickets or printed emails, or just the hope that there would be spare seats. An officer, Sergeant Raymond Holt, stood where the line tightened, talking to two of his soldiers and a station operations manager I knew by sight, Paige. They were the kind of people who managed pressure by narrowing choices down to one thing at a time. A few tracks over, the triage tent's white walls glowed under floodlights. I could see a nurse in a pale yellow gown moving between cots. Later, I would learn her name, but at that point, she was just a figure who seemed to carry calm with her. That was Maya Lin. She did the kind of work that keeps other people upright. It was in the way she gave people tasks they could do themselves. Hold this, breathe like this, focus on this. The tent had a station for hand rub, a roll of trash bags hung from a bungee cord, and stacks of masks. People came through with their bags held close and their faces set in straight lines. The public address system chimed. Passengers holding confirmed seats for the 8 o'clock southbound, please proceed to gates 6 and 7. All others, stand by for further. The speaker cut off. A second voice, on a handheld microphone near the gate, picked up where the first left off, but feedback squealed and the words turned into shapes you could not pass. Then a rumour went through the crowd that the outer quarantine perimeter had failed and that buses had been attacked somewhere near the river. Someone swore that the bridges were shut. The strange thing about rumours is that you can hear the difference in tone between a thing that happened and a thing that someone needed to believe because it made the moment make sense. This rumour had the flat tone of bad news. People's shoulders came up, heads tilted to find exits. At 7:22, I took a call from the operations desk. A software safety hold had been placed on our train. The safety hold is a lockout that prevents an engineer from taking power when there is something unsafe ahead. An open switch, a broken rail, a block of track the system cannot confirm as clear. To clear a hold, you need a combination of dispatch permission and a local physical key inserted in a panel in the control room. Paige called to say she was going to get the key while the dispatcher worked the other side. I told her I would continue checks and not take any power until I heard a clear go. I left the cab and walked down the platform to the first coach, checking each air hose connection as I passed. The glad hands, the curved metal ends, were seated well, the angle cocks open so air could flow. The brake pipe is the lifeline of the whole train. Compressed air flows from the locomotive through that pipe into every car. When pressure is up, brakes stay off. When pressure drops, brakes apply. It is a fail-safe system. We needed the pipe at a steady 110 pounds per square inch for a proper charge. Anything less, and a leak would keep the brakes applied somewhere down the line. Behind the coach line, the concourse noise swelled one notch louder. More of the sharp notes, fewer of the dull ones. I glanced toward the triage tent. Maya moved behind a curtain that swayed a little at the edge. I saw two figures step inside with her, a woman in scrubs and a soldier. The curtain moved again and then stilled. I did not think much of it because small, heavy moments happen in a medical space, and the right thing to do is to give them a boundary. Later, I would think of that swaying curtain as the edge of a different kind of map we were all about to step off of. At 7:30, a brownout rolled through the station. You could hear the hum of the big lights dip and hear a soft, collective breath ripple across the crowd. The public address tones failed mid-chime. A second later, they came back, but at half volume. Holt pointed up toward the mezzanine, where a row of cameras fed into the security office. One of his soldiers shook his head. On their console, there was a movement on the screen that watched the underground tunnels where maintenance carts ran. The soldier said it was probably a group of evacuees who had gotten turned around. The tunnel floor looked slick and people were slipping. They would send someone to guide them to the platform stairs. Holt nodded and returned to his position at the pinch point, one palm up, the other pointing in a calm circle to direct motion. I took a last look at the consist, checked the cab again, and keyed the radio to speak with the dispatcher. I asked for status on the safety hold. The answer came with static wrapped around it. Local key still required. Hold is 4-block track ahead. We're working it. Block track can be anything from a fallen branch to a switch that did not prove in the correct position to a literal obstruction. In my mind, I began to sort through what I would do in each case if we had to clear it by hand. A minute later, the first clear, wrong thing happened inside the triage tent. A woman collapsed on a cot. Maya and the scrubs nurse leaned in, taking a pulse, counting, pressing sensors under a clipped strip of tape. The nurse shook her head once, a short snap, not fatal yet, but urgent. They moved through the steps they have rehearsed 100 times. The woman's chest stopped rising. Maya's hand stayed on the patient's neck because sometimes pulses are shy when they come back. Eyes opened. That happens sometimes too, the brain taking a lagging last breath of awareness. The eyes moved in a way that made Maya's shoulders tighten. The patient sat up with a fast, stiff motion that made no medical sense. The soldier by the curtain reached to hold the patient's shoulders. That was when a second figure inside the tent made a sound that did not belong in any tent in any station. Not a scream or a shout, more like a drawn breath pulled through a throat that refused to be a throat anymore. The soldier yelled one word, "I will not repeat here." I saw the curtain bow outward, fast, as if a wind had suddenly pressed on it from inside. A grey hospital tray clattered to the floor. 2 bottles rolled out across the concrete and hit the drain grate. People who had been sitting close to the tent stood up. Those who were already standing took a step back. Those who had been patient began to measure the distance between where they were and the nearest exit they could see. The station operations manager spoke quietly into her handheld, calling for Holt to move 2 soldiers to the tent. He did not take his eyes off the line as he shifted one man and pointed to a position on the far side with a 2-finger gesture. Everything was still under control, until it was not. At 7:41, Ethan the mechanic part of my head took over from Ethan the engineer and told my legs to get back to the head end to prepare for a cold start. Under normal conditions, you never rush the process. The engine has to come alive the right way, or you will cause a chain of problems you cannot fix once you're rolling. But this was not normal. I opened the side panel and checked the batteries again. Voltage was low from earlier starts and the brownouts. I rolled a maintenance charger cart from where it sat on a painted outline, clipped the leads, and gently boosted the bank. The engine room smells like oil and warm metal even when cold. When you prime fuel lines, there is a soft buzz from pumps and a vibration on the floor plate. I watched the oil pressure needle with one eye and the platform edge with the other. I said the start steps out loud without even noticing I was doing it. Set fuel pump, prime, watch pressure, turn to start, wait for the big engine to catch. Do not throttle yet. Let it reach operating temperature so the oil can flow where it needs to. Close the main breaker. Check head-end power switch state. Leave HEP off for the first minute to let the generator catch up. The big diesel coughed and then came to life. The vibrations ran through the deck plates and up my shins. The air compressors began to work on the main reservoir, which is the locomotive's internal air storage. The gauge climbed slowly. We needed air to move and air to stop. I could spill 1,000 words about the philosophy of air brakes, but the important part is this. No air means no safe motion, and low air in a long train means a lot can go wrong that will take too long to correct with a crowd behind you. While I watched needles climb, a motion near the rear car caught my eye. Someone was moving low, using the gap between the platform's edge and the car's body to stay out of sight. A lanky teenager with a backpack and a cautious way of looking at the world. Later, I would know him as Devon. He had done a short study of which cars were the most crowded and chosen a rear door where he thought he could slide in unobserved. He moved with that mix of guilt and determination you see on people who have convinced themselves that the moral math is in their favor if they do something small and risky. The concourse noise turned jagged. Words turned to raw sound. A column of people began to press toward our gate, even though the stanchions still stood where they were. Holt's voice carried above the noise, steady and even, asking people to hold, promising order, promising that this line would move. People pressed anyway. The guard on the far side of the tent shouted for all medical personnel to back out through the north flap. Maya stepped out into the light, with a face that had learned new information it did not want. She did not run. She moved quickly, which is different. She told the soldier by the gate that the screening process could not continue safely and that they needed to narrow the entrance to form a funnel. She used that word, funnel. Holt understood immediately and began to direct the crowd toward benches, carts, and even a rolling bookshelf, turning them sideways to create a tapered passage. He did it without panic, because panic is contagious. Then we heard the first shots from somewhere above, not aimed at anyone in the station, but the kind of shots that happen when someone is surprised by something terrible and wants to stop it with the only tool in reach. The station lights flickered and the thrum of the emergency generators came up one notch, which meant the main grid had dipped or failed. The public address speakers went dead mid-tone. Someone tried a megaphone and it squealed once and cut. I closed the main breaker and brought head-end power up. The coaches hummed alive. The car lights grew steady. People who could see the train cheered in the way that people exhale when they see a plan become visible. The safety hold on my panel still glowed red. The dispatcher's voice said they were working it. I radioed for Sergeant Holt and told him I could bring air up in the train if someone connected 3 missing hose pairs. 2 had been uncoupled earlier for a leak check. It would save minutes if we did it now. He looked at the crowd and then at me and asked if anyone could be shown quickly what to do. I said yes, if they had steady hands and could listen. Devon stepped down from the gap where he had been hiding and said he could help. Holt squinted at him the way a man measures a risk and said, "Show him. I will cover the walkway." I took the kid to the first gap, showed him the glad hands and the angle cocks, explained that the angle cocks must be closed before coupling the hoses, and that the ceiling faces were sensitive. I spoke in clear steps. He mirrored me and did it right on the first try. He moved down the train to the next gap, now with the kind of purpose that helps your legs stop shaking. Behind us, the triage tent had transformed. The white walls sagged inward where people pressed against them from the inside. A hand dragged a smear down the plastic window, but I will not describe the smear because it is not helpful and because we do not need those pictures to understand what happened. Maya and the second nurse had already moved to the open aisle, creating a clean zone on the nearest coach. They told 2 passengers to open the little dispenser under the vestibule and pass out gloves. They told a third to hold a flashlight and keep it steady. They told a fourth to stand in the doorway and tell people a simple script. If you feel sick, if you are dizzy, if you have trouble breathing, come to car 2 and sit. If you feel well, help the person next to you. It sounds small, but that script kept a layer of order in a storm. The first rush of infected hit the line at the funnel. It was not a cinematic flood, not at first. It was 2 people who moved wrong and who did not respond when Holt yelled their names. People at the front of the line tried to avoid them and then could not. The sound became a hard mix of struggling and metal clanging on the floor. Holt and his soldiers did not fire into a crowd. They did what trained people do, stepped to create angles, used the tools they had, and moved people behind them. I will not describe more than that, because this is not a place for that kind of detail, and because the important thing is not what you imagine when you hear the word fight. The important thing is that the line held for a minute longer than it would have without people who had practiced how to stand in the right places. By 7:52, my main reservoir had charged enough to begin sending air through the brake pipe. The gauge in the cab climbed, then dipped, then climbed again as the air filled each coach in turn. I felt the small leaks equalize. I could do a set and release test once we were closer to departure. The safety hold still flashed. I could not take power no matter how ready we were. Paige's voice came on the radio, breathless and angry. She had the physical key from the control room. She was at the panel that controlled local lockouts. She asked me to read back the train number and the track. I did. She turned the key. Her voice steadied, hold lifted locally, waiting on dispatcher. At the same time, the dispatcher came back with a short sentence that forced the air out of my lungs. Hold origin. Block track ahead confirmed at the station throat. Object on the turnout. No power-operated movement authorized past the home signal. In plain language, something was physically on the rails where the tracks narrowed just outside the platform area. We needed that path to leave. Holt's line bent, but did not break. The soldiers fell back in short steps, bench by bench, rolling carts into new positions to narrow the funnel and keep people from being surrounded. The loudest part of the crowd had become the quietest, because fear has a way of doing that. Maya kept the clean coach clean and kept people breathing. She asked for volunteers with strong hands to lift and move bags so the aisle would be clear. People did what they were told, because someone told them calmly, and because having a job helps in a storm. I looked at the signal at the end of the platform. Red. It would stay red until we had a clear path and permission. I cued the radio to Sergeant Holt. We have a physical blockage ahead. I can get us ready, but we cannot move unless someone clears the throat. I will need a small team, track tools, maybe a jack. We are not talking about a locomotive on the rails here. Could be a small cart or debris. Holt asked, "Can you show me what needs moving?" I said yes. We moved out together in a small wedge. Holt, me, the kid, and one operations worker with a yellow hard hat who had a rolling bag of tools that clinked like a song we needed. I told Maya where we were going, and she nodded, not missing a beat with a passenger whose hands shook too much to open a water bottle. She said one sentence to me without looking up. "If you get back with the path clear, I can keep this coach stable." It was not a promise, it was a boundary. I said I understood. We walked into the station throat, the place where the several parallel platform tracks tapered and combined, branching through turnouts toward the main. Emergency lights threw harsh cones of light and shadow across ballast and steel. The rain that had started earlier had blown in. The top of the tunnel glistened. The object on the turnout revealed itself when we rounded the curve. A maintenance trolley, the kind with a small flat deck and 4 steel wheels, had jumped its rails with one wheel and come to rest diagonally across the frog of the switch, perfectly placed to make all motion impossible. A long pry bar lay halfway under it. Whoever had been here had tried to move it and then left. There were no people. The trolley was simple. 2 hard wheels, a heavy frame, a stubborn angle. The rail cut a bright line where the wheel had tried to climb it and failed. We could move it if we were careful. The operations man opened his rolling bag and pulled out a compact track jack, which is a lever device with a claw that can catch a heavy thing under its edge and lift it small amounts. We placed the claw under the frame where it would not slip. Holt took position so that if anything came from the darkness behind us, he would have space to maneuver and time to see. The kid looked at the steel and at the angle and adjusted the jack with a knack I recognized immediately. He had done this kind of leverage work before, maybe not with rail steel, but with something heavy in a tight space. We lifted the frame just enough for me to guide the wheel across the railhead. When the wheel dropped onto the proper side, the trolley shivered as if it had taken a breath. 2 more lifts, 2 more small humiliations for gravity, and the trolley sat fully on the rails again, now parallel with the direction we needed to go. We rolled the trolley back 2 yards, set the handbrake, and chalked a wheel with a block of wood. Simple acts done cleanly are a kind of relief. The turnout throw lever sat nearby, locked with a padlock. The operations man used a key to open it, pulled the handle, and we watched the points slide with a solid clack. I radioed the dispatcher with the turnout number and reported clear. He read it back. I told Paige to mark the local panel that the obstruction was gone. She did. The signal ahead stayed red because the system is cautious, but at least we had removed the one thing that could not be cleared with words. We headed back toward the platform. The sound shifted again. It was not just the crowd anymore. It was footsteps in the service corridor that had been empty earlier. The echoes fooled your ear into thinking there were more of them than there were. Holt motioned us into a staggered line that kept us clear of the center path. We did not run, because running in a tunnel with wet ballast is a bad way to end a useful day with a broken ankle. We moved with intention, and I kept my attention on the kids' feet to make sure they found solid spots. At the entry to our platform, the funnel had compressed the mass of people into a moving column. People took shallow breaths and gripped their bags. The soldiers made space. Maya met us with a quick report. Car 2 stable. Clean seats occupied by those who need them. We have a child sleeping. We have one person who may not make it. We have kept clear of anything that looks like blood. I need the train doors closed as soon as possible to maintain that boundary, I said. We will close when we have enough aboard to make the risk of closing less than the risk of staying open. We have the obstruction cleared. We need dispatch to prove the path, and then we go. She nodded once and turned back to the person in the end seat with the bottle that needed opening. I got back in the cab and wiped rain off the control panel with my sleeve. The air gauge had crept up toward the number we needed. I performed a brake set and release, moved the handle to reduce brake pipe pressure, watched the dials confirm brakes applied, then returned the handle to release, watched the pipe recharge, confirm release. Everything responded. I set the reverser key in the forward slot and left the throttle at idle. I did not take any power. The signal was still red. The safety hold now showed flashing amber, which meant waiting on dispatcher authority. The radio clicked with a half sentence and then cleared. Authority available. Proceed on dispatcher's signal when given. Restricted speed through station throat. Maintain ability to stop short of obstruction. I acknowledged and repeated. A few seconds later, the red signal ahead dropped to dark, then came back as a low yellow aspect, which in our context meant permission to proceed at restricted speed, ready to stop for whatever we might find. I looked down the platform and met Holt's eyes. He gave me a small nod. I returned it and reached for the horn cord, then stopped and put my hand on the bell instead. The bell carries better in enclosed spaces and communicates motion without causing a stampede. I eased the throttle one notch. The locomotive groaned in that low way that means electricity is beginning to flow to the traction motors. The train tugged at the couplers. The slack ran out car by car. The bell rang, and I watched the platform edge to be sure no one stepped into the gap. Movement changes the math of a crowd. People who had been pushing to get aboard realized the train was moving and pushed harder. Holt's people braced and held. Maya closed the vestibule door on her car with a tired motion that still had authority in it. Devon appeared halfway down the train, one hand on a grab rail, checking something with his eyes that I trusted even if I could not see it. We rolled. The bell became part of the station's sound. The wheels clicked over the first joint. The coach behind the cab swayed just enough to remind me of our speed. The turnout we had cleared waited ahead. Points aligned for the path to the main. I held the throttle steady and kept my hand near the automatic brake. That was when a second face of the problem revealed itself. Past turnout, just beyond the throat, on the line we needed to take to the south, sat another passenger train. Its headlights were off. Its interior lights flickered on one car and were dark in the next. The exterior paint showed the right colours and letters. The number board did not glow. It looked as if someone had parked it and then walked away before deciding whether to leave it, or as if someone had left it with the hope of coming back a few minutes later and then never had the chance. The dispatcher's voice came to my ear before I had time to ask. We have an uncrewed consist ahead. It should not be there. No crew on the roster claims it. It is blocking the southbound path beyond the station throat. Options, couple and haul both. Mass will increase stopping distance, and we have unknown condition on that train. Push it clear if brakes are released. Risk of wheel slide and damage, or route via freight bypass. Requires manual throwing of 2-yard switches ahead and a longer path to the main. I looked at the panel with the small diagram of the yard. The bypass was there, a curving path that ducked behind a line of older coaches and rejoined the main farther south. It would take time to set and spike the switches by hand. I keyed the radio and spoke plainly. We have an active crowd and a clean car that loses its boundary with time. The safest plan is the one that moves us soonest with the least unknowns. Coupling to an unknown train puts unknown weight in our braking math. Pushing risks climbing a wheel and causing a derailment. If we can set those 2 switches quickly, we take the bypass. Sergeant Holt has people. I have one experienced hand with me and a young one who learns fast. We can throw and spike. Page came on to say the first switch's lock often sticks in damp weather and to bring a can of lubricant from the service locker. Devon, who had no place on a railroad radio and who understood enough to keep his mouth shut, held up a small aerosol can he had pulled from the maintenance cart earlier and raised his eyebrows. I nodded to him, which he took as permission. We rolled to a stop just before the first switch. I set the brakes. The bell went silent. The station sound grew louder in the sudden absence of our noise. Holt met us with 2 of his soldiers. I briefed everyone in simple terms. 2 switches. Each has a lock. We unlock, pull the lever, watch the points move fully, then drive a steel spike into the clamp to keep it from drifting. We do not put our fingers where they can be pinched. We keep our heads on a swivel. If we cannot move a lever, we do not force it with our backs. We call out and find another angle. We move down the ballast. The rain had turned to a thin mist. The horn of another train somewhere across the river sounded, distant and strange. A ghost of the way the city had sounded at night 2 weeks ago. We found the first switch. The lock was, as promised, stubborn. Devon knelt and shot a short burst of lubricant into the keyhole and along the hasp. Page's key turned. The lever came halfway with our weight and then paused. We did not force it. We shifted our grip and pulled again, straight through. The points slid and kissed the rail with a tight seal. I drove the spike home and felt the vibration through the hammer handle. At that moment, the station behind us made the kind of sound that puts metal in your mouth. A new surge had reached the funnel. Holt's instinct was to pivot and run back. He looked at me with a question that held 2 plans and 1 body. I said the truth. If we leave these switches, we do not go. If we do not go, that line will not hold forever. He looked back at the station entrance and then turned to the second switch with me, jaw set in the way men set them when they file choices where they will not break. We reached the second switch. This one was clear and moved easily. We spiked it. I radioed the dispatcher with the positions. He acknowledged and told me to proceed at restricted speed onto the bypass. I told Holt that if he had to fall back, we could move the train as barrier to close the approach from one side. He nodded and returned to the platform at a controlled pace that did not waste breath. I jogged back to the cab with Devon. We were both breathing through our mouths because adrenaline had decided to make that choice for us. I climbed into the left seat and eased the throttle. The bell rang again. The train began to move along the curve that would take us behind the dead consist and around to the main line. The wheels squealed on the curve the way steel does on steel when it is wet. I touched the sand button to drop grit onto the railhead to improve traction. The vibration changed pitch as the motors grabbed. We passed the side of the unlit train at slow speed. The windows were fogged from the inside in odd patterns. Some had handprints on them. Others showed only a grey smear from condensation. I kept my eyes ahead because I have learned that the work in front of you is the only work you can do. Transfixed is how people get hurt. As we came parallel with the platform again, I saw that Maya had got her coach secure. Doors closed. Her face was tired and absolutely focused. People inside sat with their hands on their knees, in the way that people do when someone has told them, "This is how we will do it." Holt had formed his last line at the step of car 3. A man at the edge of the crowd yelled about fairness, and about how his wife had a ticket for the previous train that had never arrived. Holt answered back calmly that they would move as many as could be moved, and that pushing would prevent any moving at all. The man stepped back 2 inches, and those 2 inches were enough to keep the column from collapsing. The bypass rejoined the main beyond the dead train. The signal there showed a permissive aspect, which in this context meant we could proceed cautiously onto the southbound line. The yard beyond the station throat opened into the city, and I could see beyond the roofline a ghostly glow to the south where lights flickered and then failed, and in the far distance, the orange of what might have been a fire, or might have been something else entirely. The rain mist caught the floodlights in swirls. Chicago smelled like wet stone and diesel, and something else I will not name. We crossed the last turnout and felt the smooth, straight run of the main under us. I slowly added another notch of throttle. The locomotive responded with a deeper hum. The train followed, steady. The coaches rode nicer than they had at platform speed. People inside exhaled in that way you can feel more than hear. In the mirror, I saw Devon jogging alongside until the platform ended, then grabbing the ladder on the final car and swinging up with a nimble confidence that did not offend me because he had earned it. He caught my eye down the length and gave a small nod. I returned it. As we cleared the station, the radio woke. A dispatcher from farther down the line, voice less tired than our Chicago man, came on with an offer. We can line you through at restricted speed until milepost 5, where we have confirmed clear. After that, speed as conditions allow. You have priority if you maintain communication, I read back. He added, almost as an afterthought, reports of pedestrians on the right of way near the bridge at Roosevelt Road. Watch the right side. I said I would. We rolled under Roosevelt and out into the part of the city where steel meets open air. The rain had freshened. The windshield wipers thumped. The horn, when I used it, sounded like a warning and like a prayer, which is a thing I would not say, except that is how it felt in my chest. The city to the east had pockets of light and large dark zones. To the west, a line of headlights on a road that went nowhere. Cars turned sideways. A bus on the shoulder with its hazard flashes still doing their job. The wider world had become a series of small islands where people stood back to back and tried to hold their lines. It would be nice to end here, with a train moving into the night and a plan that worked. But the title of this day had already been written, and it did not include the word easy. About a mile from the station, as we rolled along the bypass back to the main, the dispatcher came back in my ear with a clipped edge to his voice. Be advised, you are overtaking an evac consist that left earlier and did not clear our board. We do not have a crew logged for it now. It is stopped on the main, lights intermittent. It is 3 cars ahead of you at low speed if it moves at all, and dead if it does not. We do not know what is aboard. I looked ahead into the rain and saw the shape of square windows where there should have been only night. I throttled down and let the train coast. The wheels hissed on the wet rails. I ran through the mental list of coupling a dead train in the open, match speed, ease the coupler into the pocket, take the bump at walking speed, stretch the slack to confirm connection, then walk the line to connect the air and open the angle cocks. In pure mechanics, it is not complicated. In the present moment, it held everything that could go wrong if the cars ahead held people who were not able to be people anymore. In the side mirror, I could see Holt make his way up through the cars. He entered the cab and stood with his back to the wall, one hand holding a rail to steady himself. He did not say more than he had to. Options? He asked. I gave him the 3 we had already discussed back at the station. Couple and haul both, push it clear, or find a second bypass if it existed. He looked into the rain and made the kind of decision men like him have to make when all the choices are bad. If we can couple clean and move, we take it. If the cars ahead are compromised, we do not open a door unless we can control the interior. If we cannot couple without risking a derailment, we stop and defend here with the train as a barrier. He said the last sentence carefully, because he knew what it would mean for the people behind us, who now believed movement would save them. He also knew the truth that has kept more people alive than any other in a crisis. Sometimes standing still with your back against something solid is the safest move you have. We closed the distance slowly. The dead train ahead sat with its lights flickering on the second car and off on the first. The third car showed a dim glow, like a battery trying to remember what its job was. There were shapes in the windows. I did not look long enough to make stories out of them. I focused on the coupler on the rear of that train, on the angle of the drawbar, on the way its draft gear hung a little low on the left, which meant we would meet slightly off-center, and I would need to correct at the last second. I eased the throttle to idle, opened the independent brake just enough to feel the nose dip, and then released for the last 2 yards. I coasted the last yard and held a breath I did not know I was holding. The couplers met with a soft metal thud that you could feel through the seat more than you could hear through the rain. The slack ran in. I eased back, just a hair, to stretch the connection, testing whether we had the knuckles locked. The sound came back clean. We were married to the dead weight. The air between us remained closed because the angle cocks on the dead train were shut. That was good. An open cock on a dead train with a leak would bleed our brake pipe forever. To make it movable, someone would have to go out with a lantern and open the valves, watching for leaks, watching for any motion inside the cars that might become a risk. Holt and I looked at each other and then at the door. He had a soldier in the next car ready. He asked me how long I needed to charge the air if the system ahead was intact. I said 2 to 5 minutes, depending on leaks. He nodded. "We do not have 5 out there," he said quietly. Not because the infected were close, but because time itself had changed into a thing with teeth. I told him we could cheat a little by leaving the angle cocks half cracked to limit flow until we got some pressure and then open them fully. He said, "Do that. We will be your eyes." He stepped out with the soldier and Devon trailing because of course the kid was there, and of course he understood that he was not supposed to be, and that I was going to let him anyway because he had hands that did what they were told. They moved along the ballast, their headlamps making cones that swung in slow arcs. Holt reached the rear of the dead train and leaned in to open the valve. He did it in one motion because he knew hesitation can be dangerous. Devon stood with his back to the car, watching both directions, the way someone does when they are learning to make a shape of protection. The soldier kept his posture neutral and ready. I cracked our angle cock and watched the brake pipe needle dip, and then climb, dip, and then climb, as air began to fill the empty volume of the dead train. The rain hissed. The city lights behind us flickered again and held. Maya's voice came on the radio, steady, telling us that the clean car remained clean, and that she had people breathing in unison with a simple count. That detail would not normally matter, but it kept me from pressing the throttle just to feel something respond to my hand. We held there, the 2 trains together, the rain making a steady whisper on the metal. The dispatcher said nothing, because sometimes silence is the right thing on a radio, while people do something that cannot be improved by talking. The brake pipe needle climbed to a number that meant we could move. I gave a soft tug. The dead train slack pulled tight. Nothing slid. Nothing dropped. We were attached to a weight we did not understand, but we were moving it. I eased the throttle to the first notch, and then the second. The combined train rolled forward. The wheels made that relief noise that steel makes when it proves it still wants to roll. I did not think about what might be inside those cars. I thought about the next 100 yards of track and the curve that would take us toward the clearer section, and the small hope in the dispatcher's voice when he had said the words "clear at milepost 5. Behind me in the mirror, I saw Holt's silhouette on the ballast for a second before he climbed back aboard. He looked like a man who had chosen his next choice and then made it. We passed under another overpass where water fell in sheets from the edges. The city on both sides took on that wet glow that makes everything look like it is behind glass. I saw a crew of 3 people on the right of way, waving frantically for us to stop. I reached for the whistle cord and gave 2 short blasts to say we saw them and could not stop. They stepped back. One of them held up a sign made from a piece of cardboard with one word in block letters: "Help." I did not say the thing I thought, because sometimes the worst part of a job like this is admitting how small your circle of help can be when you are the only one holding a throttle. Holt did not say anything either. We watched them pass into the dark behind us, and I pressed my tongue against my front teeth to keep from saying something that would not change anything. At the next signal, the aspect climbed from permissive to a more favourable one. The dispatcher came back with a line that felt like a door opening. "You are clear at milepost 5. No conflicting movements reported. You are the railroad out there right now." It is a thing dispatchers say sometimes, and it can mean do what you need. It can also mean this is on you. I took it as both. We continued south at a speed that felt like it would not make a mistake into a disaster. The rain slackened. The air inside the cab smelled like damp cloth and warm electronics. The wipers squeaked at the end of their stroke. Somewhere behind me in car 2, a child slept with their head on a folded jacket, and Maya counted quietly to help frightened people time their breaths. Somewhere farther back, Devon sat with his back to a vestibule door, and stared out into a world that would never be small again. Holt stood where he could see forward and back, a hand on a rail, the other on the radio, a man who had accepted the weight of a decision and had decided not to let it flatten him. We came to a curve where the city opened, and I could see the skyline behind us, Chicago's stubborn outline under a low ceiling. It did not burn in the way a movie would have it burn. It betrayed itself in pockets, a flicker here, a transformer there, the kind of dark that moves over a city when parts of it turn into power islands and then fail one by one. It looked like a map where someone had begun to erase. Just as I let that sight pass through me and sink down into the part of my mind that stores pictures I will not open often, our headlights swept over something ahead that did not belong. A second train, not the dead one we hauled, not any train I expected, sat on a siding that paralleled the main for 200 yards. Its lights flickered in the exact same pattern as the earlier one had. Its cars had fogged windows too. Inside those windows, shapes moved, some swift, some slow. The lead car's door hung ajar by an inch. A paper sign sat crooked in that door's window, with the words Special Evac handwritten in marker that had bled in the damp. For a heartbeat, the entire night drew down to two facts. We had people aboard who were relying on us to keep moving, and there were people or things inside that second train who needed something we could not give without becoming them. The narrator part of my mind, the one that likes to make arcs and to close circles, wanted very badly to make a turn onto that siding, to open a door, to count heads, to say a number that ended in the word saved. The engineer part of my mind, the one that knows that the force required to stop and start a multi-hundred-ton mass is not just a number but a set of consequences, kept my hand on the throttle where it was. The human part of me, the part that is not a title or a job, watched those flickering lights and said a sentence to the empty air that I will not repeat here because it belongs to a private place. We rolled past, and the night took the second train back into itself. The dispatcher asked for our speed, and I told him. He told me the next 10 miles were clear, and that he would stay on the line. He said nothing about the train we had just seen, either because he did not know about it, or because he knew and also knew that sometimes the only smart thing to do is to let the air between two people be quiet. The last thing I saw of the city before the curve hid it for good was the dim outline of the Great Hall's skylight far to the north, a lighter patch of dark where people had gathered to wait for a thing that had not come. The last thing I felt was the locomotive's steady hum under my feet, as it did the one honest thing it could do, turn fuel and air into motion and light, and the hope that distance would make the decisions we had made today hold. We did not find safety that night. That is not how these stories end. We found a stretch of track where no one stood and no train sat across us. We found a dispatcher who kept talking. We found the limits of our luck and our planning and decided to move those limits by inches instead of by leaps. We found that a kid can become a brakeman in an evening if the world asks him to, and if someone shows him how to hold a wrench. We found that a nurse can set a boundary and still be kind. We found that a sergeant can decide that the right rule is the one that saves the most people in front of him, not the one written in a book for a day that looks nothing like this one. We found that a city can be both broken and still itself. We found that a train can be both a way out and a weight that keeps you where you are if you let it. By the time the clock struck 9 o'clock in the evening, if clocks mattered anymore, we had left Chicago far enough behind that the skyline had turned into a faint, low glow. The rails ahead kept unwinding in the headlight beam. The two trains we were now pulling together made a different song than one train alone. You learn the weight of the train you have by the way the motors hum when you notch up, and by the way the couplers talk when you take in slack or let it out. This one sang of work done in the rain, and of hands that did what they were told, even when they shook. Holt stood in the doorway of the cab and looked forward with me. He did not try to make a speech. He just said, "We will need to stop before long to switch crews and to check on people." I said, I know a siding near a small signal house where there is a telephone that still worked last month. Flat, quiet. Milepost 15. He nodded. We will try there. He took a breath and added, You did right with the bypass. I said, So did you with the funnel. We did not say more because the night had things to say that did not need us. As we rolled into the distance, the rain finally washed the last of the station's grit from the windshield. The wipers had an easier time. The headlight reached farther. In the far, far distance, I could almost imagine the sky lightening, not to morning, not yet, but to that pre-dawn shade where shapes become clear before they reveal their names. And then, as if the day wanted to put its own underline under the words, the last evacuation train never left the platform, the radio on the shelf crackled with a voice we had not heard before. It was thin, like it was coming through a long tunnel. If anyone can hear me, it said, we took shelter in the old postal platforms. We can see your light when you pass near the river. We do not have a way out, and the doors will not open from the inside. We have children. The message repeated once and then cut, not with a click, but with a soft whine that sounded like a battery failing. The cab stayed quiet. Holt did not look at me, and I did not look at him. We both knew that the postal platforms were the old mail handling spaces underneath the station, connected to service corridors we had just moved past when we cleared the maintenance trolley. We both knew that if we went back there now, we would turn our train into a wall inside a space meant to hold mail, not breath. We both knew that the city had learned a new trick tonight, to keep people inside the very buildings that had saved them an hour before. I did the only thing I could do that did not make a liar out of everything we had done since 7:10. I reached for the radio and said to the dispatcher, mark that location. When we are clear and when we have a place to put these people who are trusting us to take them south, we will come back for those platforms. Mark it and do not erase it. The dispatcher said, marked. His voice did not crack, so mine did not either. We kept rolling. The night kept making us small. The locomotive kept doing its honest work. Somewhere behind us, in a city that looks different in memory than it does in pictures, the great hall filled with a breath that was not air. Somewhere ahead of us, in a stretch of track that still obeyed the rules of electricity and steel, a signal stayed green for us because a human hand told it to, and because we had asked, and because that is still how certain kinds of miracles work. The abandoned, flickering train we had first seen remained in the rails of my thoughts. It was the kind of sight that insists on staying. It was also a promise, though, the kind that you do not make out loud, because the people next to you need quiet more than they need vows. It was the promise that tracks go both directions, and that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is get far enough away to be able to turn back without bringing the whole weight of what is chasing you back into the place you are trying to save. We moved south. We did not talk about what might be in the cars we towed. We did not count the miles out loud. We watched the headlight carve a corridor through the dark, and we kept to the center of that corridor as if our lives depended on it, because they did. And when the dispatcher told us that the next junction was lined for us and that we would have a straight shot past the last city blocks and into the lowland beyond, I nodded to no one and kept my hands steady, and reminded myself to breathe at a normal rate so my hands would not shake when the next switch needed throwing and the next decision needed to feel like a normal thing done in a normal night. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe. Your support keeps these creepypastas coming. Until next time, stay alert, stay safe, and never ignore the feeling that something is watching.